It gives me a real pleasure to introduce everyone to what certainly should be an exciting event. The timing is right, the subject is right, and our speakers, I think you will find, are the right ones for what should be an important and exciting program. I'm Kent Calder, the director of the Reischauer Center for East Asian Studies here at SAIS, Johns Hopkins University. And this is our initial program of the year, but the third, actually, in a series of programs focusing on Afghanistan in the broader context of the Asian region. Rahul Osmani, who is with us today, is formerly Director General of the Afghan Civil Service Commission under President Karzai, has helped tremendously in organizing this, and we certainly appreciate that. You might wonder what the rationale for an East Asian Studies Center sponsoring a program on the future of Afghanistan and the region in the new U.S. administration might be. Of course, our focus is on the issue of the moment, which is the impending transition in the United States and the implications for what has been ever since the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon on September 11th, 2001, now nearly 14 years ago, has been one of the principal security issues for the United States and for the world. But it also, in that Afghanistan lies in the midst of the largest continent in the world and and the most populous, and recently also one of the most rapidly growing, is of tremendous importance for Asia as well. Afghanistan lies directly adjacent, of course, to China, very close to India, the two most populous nations on Earth. And as the conflict in Afghanistan has proceeded over the years, Japan and Korea, both close allies of the United States, have also played significant roles in supporting the United States there. So we're here today to discuss those issues with a very distinguished panel that will be introduced by Rahul Osmani, as I mentioned, who has tremendous policy experience in Afghanistan, is Afghan, but is also now a visiting scholar here at our Reischauer Center for East Asian Studies. So with that, Rahula, we look forward to your introductions and, of course, to the panel to follow. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you, Professor Calder. It's a pleasure for me to introduce the panelists today. But before that, I would like to also extend my thanks and appreciation to ambassadors and Scout who accepted to speak today at today's panel on Afghanistan and broader Asia issues in the new administration. The panelist, as you also read briefly on the flyer, is Ambassador Anthony Wen. Ambassador Wen is a public policy fellow at Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Global Business and Economic Program, and also Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. Ambassador Wen was ambassador to Mexico from 2011 to 2015, the largest U.S. mission in the world. From 2009 to 2011, Ambassador Wen served in Kabul as Deputy Ambassador and also Coordinator for Economic and Development Affairs. And also from 2006 to 2009, Ambassador also served as a U.S. Ambassador to Argentina. From 2000 to 2006, Ambassador Wen served as Assistant Secretary of State for Economic and Business Affairs, serving the three Secretary of States. I think the longest-serving Assistant Secretary of State for Economic and Business Affairs since the Bureau's inception. Also, from 1996 to 2000, Ambassador Wen served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs. At that time, Ambassador Wen played a key role in building a G8 consensus on situations surrounding Kosovo and organizing 1999 Stability Pact Summit in Sarajevo. Ambassador Wen has also received 2 Presidential Meritorious Service Awards, a Secretary of Defense Medal for Meritorious Civilian Service, and also the State Department's Carter Hall Award for Economic Achievement and the Charles Scope Award for Initiative and Success in Trade Development. He was also confirmed as Career Ambassador. Ambassador Wen has a master's degree in public administration from Harvard University, and a master's degree in political science from Princeton University and Stanford University, and a bachelor degree in political science from University of California, Berkeley, all great places. Ambassador John Cunningham is the non-resident senior fellow at Atlantic Council South Asia Center here in DC, and Ambassador Cunningham served as ambassador to Afghanistan from August 2012 to December 2014. The critical time in Afghanistan history. And also, Ambassador Cunningham served as Deputy Ambassador to Afghanistan from 2011 to 2012. Ambassador Cunningham was as ambassador to Israel from 2008 to 2011, and Consul General for Hong Kong and Macau from 2005 to 2008, and ambassador and deputy permanent representative to the United Nations in New York City from 1999 to 2004, and acting permanent representative to the United Nations for first 9 months of 2001, including 9/11. As Chief of Staff to NATO Secretary General from 1988 to 1990s, Ambassador Cunningham advised Secretary General on all 8 NATO issues in the context of nuclear disarmament in Europe and the collapse of Berlin Wall and reunification of Germany and the impending dissolution of Warsaw Pact and Soviet Union. Ambassador Cunningham was born in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and graduated from Syracuse University with degree in political science and psychology. Ambassador Cunningham is the recipient of multiple awards from State Department, the National Performance Review Hammer Award for Innovation in Management, and the U.S. Presidential Meritorious Service Award twice. He has also received awards from Conference of Presidents of major Jewish organizations, the Secretary of Defense, and Afghan government, I think a Medal of Honor from President Ghani. And Ambassador Cunningham is a member of Council on Foreign Relations and the Asia Society. Mr. Scott Worden is the Director of Afghanistan and Central Asia Programs at the U.S. Institute of Peace, USIP. He comes into this role with an extensive background in reconstruction, development, democracy, governance, policy, among others, as well as extensive regional expertise on Afghanistan and Pakistan. Before joining USIP, Scott was Director of Lessons Learned Program at the Office of Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SAGAR. You might have heard of SAGAR, of course. He also served as Acting Director of Policy, as well as Senior Policy Advisor for Office of Afghanistan and Pakistan Affairs at the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. And also in the latter position, he was responsible for advising senior officials on strategies and sustainable development in Afghanistan and Pakistan. At his time at USIP, Mr. Worden directed rule of law programs for the USIP and served as United Nations appointed Electoral Complaint Commissioner for 2009 Afghanistan election, as well as advising the UN on elections in 2005 and 2006. I'm sure it was a challenging time also. Mr. Worden has a decade of experience working on Afghanistan issues and working in the field. Thank you, panelists, for participating on today's panel. And last but not least, Professor Ken Coulter is currently Director of Russia Center for East Asian Studies and Director of Asia Program at the Johns Hopkins University SAIS, where I also have the honor of working with him as a visiting scholar. Professor Coulter taught for 20 years at Princeton University and also a visiting professor at Seoul National University in Korea and lecturer on government at Harvard University. Professor Coulter has also served as special advisor to the U.S. ambassador to Japan from 1997 to 2001. Japan chair at the Center for Strategic International Studies from 1989 to 1993 and 1996, and as the first executive director of Harvard University's program on U.S.-Japan relations. Professor Calder received his PhD from Harvard University in 1979, where he worked under the direction of Edwin O. Rashower. Professor Calder has spent 11 years living and researching in Japan and 4 years elsewhere in Asia. Professor Calder's most recent books, of course, among dozens of other books that he has published, are Singapore, The Smart City, The Smart States, Brookings 2016, the US, Japan, and the Gulf region, August 2015, Asia in Washington, Brookings 2014, and the New Continentalism, Energy, and 21st Century Euro-Asia Geopolitics, Yale 2012. And I encourage all of you to please read Professor Calder's book also. Thank you very much, and I hand it over to Professor Ken Calder, who will moderate the panel.
Well, thank you very much, Rahula. I think, as you can see, we have in our panel, the three participants here, some tremendously knowledgeable people, very distinguished careers, and we look forward to hearing from them. First, from Ambassador Cunningham, please.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Rahula. I want to say a couple words about how I hope the new administration, the Trump administration, will approach Afghanistan in particular, but also the broader range of issues in that part of the world. This administration is going to have an incredibly complicated and in some respects dangerous agenda when it takes office. I won't go through all the items on the agenda because you all know them, but it really is quite a daunting prospect. Afghanistan does not have to be one of those issues, and I hope it won't be. In order to solidify itself and get its feet on the ground, what I hope this administration will do about Afghanistan is first and foremost, very early on, even before it takes office, I would hope that it will send a clear and firm signal of American commitment to our relationship with Afghanistan and to our role in the region and to maintaining the kind of policy and posture that we now have in Afghanistan, so that there will be clarity in the region once and for all about the enduring nature of the American presence and commitment to that part of the world, as long as the United States has a willing and committed partner in the government of Afghanistan. This is not a call for a blank check, but it is a call for reassurance to the Afghans and our international partners and our friends in the region that we intend to remain on the course that we're on now and to pursue a strategy which is having difficulty in advancing, but is advancing, as long as the Afghans themselves continue to do the hard work of stepping up and protecting their country and advancing their own very difficult process of development and reform. That kind of clarity is really essential if we're going to be able, we collectively, not just the United States, but we and our partners and the Afghans are going to be able to prevail in the coming years. Unfortunately, that clarity has been lacking in the last couple of years, and I hope it will be provided once and for all. Failure to do so, failure to provide that clarity, will undermine the confidence of our friends and partners, and it will encourage our adversaries in the region. It will also encourage hedging behavior on the part of other actors in the region, as we're seeing today, as we've seen particularly in the last 6 to 8 months with other countries who are involved there. This is going to be something of a conceptual challenge, I think, for this administration. The president-elect seems to place a high value on unpredictability. There is a place for unpredictability in foreign affairs, there's no doubt about that. And there's been some interesting articles written about that recently. But there is also, at the same time, a need to provide confidence and certainty to partners when we're asking them to work with us on doing things that are difficult to achieve. And if we want partners, then we're going to need partners, not just to succeed in what we're trying to achieve in Afghanistan, but most particularly in what we're trying to achieve in defeating ISIS and that brand of ideology that ISIS represents. We are going to need partners who are committed to working with us over the long haul. And I hope that the new president and his advisors will work to find that balance and to find that appropriate measure of clarity and commitment, as well as in some respects a lack of predictability on the part of the administration. The second thing that I hope this administration will do early on is place Afghanistan in the broader context of the challenges that the United States and our partners are facing in what I call the greater Middle East, rather than dividing it up, but in the area where we are collectively involved in dealing with a series of different but related confrontations with Islamic extremism throughout Central Asia, parts of Asia, and through the Middle East into Northern Africa. Afghanistan isn't an isolated problem, and it can't be solved as an isolated problem. It is part of a much broader crisis that we're dealing with that's going to be very difficult to resolve. In fact, I don't believe it's capable of being resolved or solved by the United States at all. We can play a major role as we are now, but ultimately the solution to dealing with this violent ideology, this distorted ideology, has to come from within the Islamic and the Muslim world itself. Afghanistan is a part of that effort, and it is a place where, for better or worse, we have a history and a specific background that we have developed over the years. We need to figure out how to build on that and to help the Afghans to succeed, but we also need to be aware that the challenge we're dealing with in Afghanistan is part of this bigger picture, and we need to start looking at it in that fashion. There aren't any short-term solutions to this, unfortunately. Americans like short-term solutions, but there isn't one to this broader issue that we're trying to deal with. And one of the things that I think, not just the American government, but most of the governments in our coalition have not done an adequate job of explaining this to their own publics. And I think we owe it to the past administration, this administration, those of us who were involved in this kind of policy discussion, owe it to our publics to explain to them the nature of the problem that we're dealing with, how difficult it is going to be to overcome it, and why a long-term commitment is essential, not just in Afghanistan, but more broadly throughout the region. The third thing that I hope the administration will do is, with a new team, and I'm sure they will, a new team in place, is step back and take a fresh look at what we're actually doing on the ground in Afghanistan, militarily, in the development field, politically, economically, and see if we can't do a better job of being more efficient and more effective in how we're applying what is a much reduced but still considerable amount of resources to dealing with the problems of Afghanistan and the region. We need to figure out a strategy, do a better job of figuring out a strategy that links our multiple efforts of diplomacy and military and development to the overall goal of bringing about an end to the conflict and to getting the Taliban into a serious negotiation about peace in the region. In order to do that, we need to affect the strategic calculations of a number of players, leadership of the Taliban, of course, and others of that ilk, but we also need to affect the strategic calculations of players in the region. And we need to do a better job of marshaling and bringing together the resources that we have at our disposal, that our many partners have at their disposal. And this is a good time to take a fresh look with a new team coming in. And in that same vein, the fourth thing that I hope the new administration will do is take a fresh look at Pakistan, our relationship with Pakistan, and Pakistan's role in the region and in the conflict. We also need to figure out a way, if we can, to change the strategic calculus of Pakistan to make it an effective interlocutor in curtailing the activities of the Taliban and the Haqqanis within Pakistan, and in eliminating the safe haven that they enjoy. It's a political almost everybody I know believes there's no military solution to this conflict. It needs to come to a political resolution through negotiation. In order to get to that kind of serious negotiation, we need to be able to affect how the Taliban looks at its options in the future, and it'd be very, very difficult to do that if they continue to enjoy the ability to plan and operate from within Pakistan. There's a new leadership, new military leadership in place now in Pakistan, a new administration in Washington. I hope that we will take a fresh look at how we might be able to use both incentives and disincentives to encourage the kind of cooperation that we have been trying for years to generate from Pakistan. A number of us who have been involved in this discussion, I think, have all agreed that what we have been doing vis-a-vis Pakistan in the past years has not worked. There hasn't been very much agreement about what a different approach might look like, but this is the time, I think, to step back and take a look at that.
Well, Ambassador, thank you very much for some fascinating remarks. Of course, from someone who has played such a key role so recently on this issue. Just one question that I had relating to what you said a couple of times about the need to shape the strategic calculations of players in the region. Of course, China borders Pakistan directly along the Wakhan corridor, and Xinjiang, of course, is very close by. One should suppose that China certainly has an interest in the stability of Pakistan. President Ghani visited there as one of his very first visits. And of course, they also have a huge new development program in Pakistan. I wonder if you could elaborate not only on China, but perhaps a little more on two of our close allies, Japan and Korea, in terms of things that those three Asian countries, and of course, we realize you were consul, you spent time in Hong Kong, and you've looked at China in the past. What sort of a role going forward these three Asian countries can play in shaping the incentives of some of the players?
I think they can all play a role, and particularly China, given its close relationship with Pakistan and its slowly increasing engagement in Afghanistan itself. During the time that I was there, we and others spent considerable time trying to draw the Chinese into a discussion about how we might cooperate better in promoting stability in Afghanistan. The Chinese are economically engaged. They began to be more politically and diplomatically engaged during the time that I was there. There are significant infrastructure programs that are now directed at Pakistan, but that could be linked to Afghanistan, that would be to China's advantage as well. There's a railway that's just been opened between Xinjiang and northern Afghanistan. So there's a lot of potential there, but the Chinese, is, in my experience, have been pretty deft at avoiding taking any kind of responsibility for difficult areas like this, especially when the United States and other countries are fully engaged there. They definitely have a role to play, and they can bring influence to bear on Pakistan, and that's one of the elements that we need to take that this administration should take a closer look at. Japan and Korea, to their credit, have both been very positive and substantial players, and not so much in the politics of the region, but in terms of both development assistance and in funding and in training. And they will remain important partners in the coalition. They're not physically proximate to the area, but to their credit, they have seen that it is in their interest, in the interests of the region, to try to stabilize Afghanistan. I think they'll continue to play that role, as long as we provide the kind of clarity that I started talking about in the beginning.
So clarity really is a key element in this, isn't it?
It has always been.
Well, thank you very much, and I know many of our audience also, of course, are knowledgeable, and later, after we've heard from each of our distinguished participants, of course, we do want to engage in a broader dialogue. As our second speaker, we have Scott Warden from the U.S. Institute of Peace. Mr. Warden.
Great. Thank you very much, and good morning. Thanks for having me here. So one of the risks of following somebody who has such distinguished and long experience is that some of our points might sound similar, but I hope that that's a good thing, and it reflects, I think, what has long been a kind of consensus view among the foreign policy community about both the importance of Afghanistan and also some of the ways to approach it. Even though those haven't borne fruit quickly, I think that there is a plan which is going to produce benefits over time. And let me talk a little bit about that. First of all, there hasn't been much discussion of Afghanistan in the campaign or now even in the transition. In some ways, for someone, myself, who believes that we should continue our engagement in Afghanistan, that might be a good thing. The things that have come up have been points of criticism. I think that maybe the absence of Afghanistan from the debate does reflect a sort of quiet consensus view that our engagement there is really important. Quickly, the reason why it's important is because Afghanistan is a fragile but important ally in a region that has significant terrorism threats. It has the rise of ISIS in the region and somewhat in Afghanistan. And this is an important area to preserve some degree of stability, and I think that our policies right now do that, as imperfect as they may be. I think we also see what happens when we pursue an alternative path. Afghanistan and Iraq are different countries, of course, but you saw when we did pull all of our troops out of Iraq, instability followed, ISIS gained a foothold. Again, these are different countries, but I think that there is this significant risk if we don't have a troop presence maintained there, but also a robust civilian commitment, then it creates uncertainty, it potentially creates security vacuums, and it creates more headaches later on. I was in Afghanistan a few months ago, and maybe I can talk about the current fragility or political situation for a bit. I think there have been some important developments since this summer politically in Afghanistan. We have a national unity government, which was formed under some controversy after the 2014 elections, which were disputed between President Ghani and the CEO Abdullah. There was an agreement that was brokered to bring those two sides together into a unity government, which often has been fighting with itself, but at the same time represents, I think, credible reformists at the helm that are people that we can work with. And so to what Ambassador Cunningham said, we do have a government we can work with, and the better it performs, the better our relationship will be, and I think the better its stability will be. What you see unfolding from in August, when both Ghani and Abdullah were accusing each other of undermining the government that they serve in, is, I think, a reluctant but broad-based view among the Afghan political leaders that the national unity government is the best of all the alternatives that they can think of for running the country, and dissent among the political elite calling the government illegitimate, saying that it needed to be replaced either through a Loya Jirga process or otherwise through a constitutional review process, those calls have quieted down considerably. And I think in that, there is an opportunity for the government to work together more on implementing policies that will actually reduce corruption, that will improve the economy, or at least improve service delivery to people so that Afghans can see that a government can benefit them rather than be an obstacle. Another key issue to watch in Afghanistan is the process of electoral reform, which has finally gotten underway after about 2 years of rancorous debate. There's a new election commission formed, and they're reviewing procedures to finally hold a parliamentary election, which is now 2 years overdue. The reason why this is important is because this was one of the central promises that the National Unity Government made when it was inaugurated in 2014, was to hold elections, to have electoral reform, then to hold elections quickly, have a new parliament, and start a process to review how the government should be structured and how it should function. I think what we will see over the next several months in terms of the timing of elections, in terms of how electoral reform unfolds, will tell us whether the unity, the fragile unity in the unity government will hold, or whether we're off for more of the same. I'll remind people that the next presidential election is in 2019. It's a 5-year presidential term. And so if the Afghan government is to get anything done in terms of reforms and service delivery, it really does need to stay together in the next few months before the election season begins in a couple of years. Let me turn back to the U.S. approach to Afghanistan and what I think are keys to U.S. policy and what I hope the new Trump administration will look at when it comes into office. As I said, it hasn't been mentioned much. I don't think that Afghanistan will be priority number one among the various domestic initiatives and foreign threats, but I do hope and expect that there will be a policy review, again, as the ambassador mentioned, to take a fresh look at Afghanistan, but with a mind toward maintaining our commitment. I think the number one thing that Afghanistan and the region needs to improve stability is assurance from the United States, from the allies, that we will remain committed over the long term with both military and civilian assistance. I think that in retrospect, one of the biggest factors why there wasn't progress on a peace process while we had the surge and afterwards was that there was an end date, and that both Afghans but also Afghanistan's neighbors, which play a role in the insurgency, started hedging their bets. They started committing to a reform process in word, but maintaining options to either support the Taliban or to, on the Afghan side, pursue avenues of corruption just in case the process fell apart. And I think that finding ways to end this uncertainty, and the ambassadors will know the techniques better than I, but finding ways to convince Afghanistan and its neighbors that we are committed for the long haul and that you can't play a waiting game in order to gain advantage around the system, that's vitally important. And so therefore, yes, there should be reforms in how we spend our money, make it more efficient, fight corruption. Those are all very important. But at the end of the day, Afghanistan will collapse if we don't have significant military assistance from the US and our allies, our NATO allies, as well as if we don't have significant civilian assistance. And so we need to maintain that portfolio and also give assurances that that will continue. I think another question that the administration will deal with, and that is a continuous debate within the Afghanistan and regional foreign policy community, is what's the theory of change? How can I make that less wonky? What is the path to success in a mix of civilian and military assistance? And I think this is where you have a real debate and real uncertainty, and it has caused vacillation in policy from one approach to another. And so one school, to describe it, is we need robust military assistance. This is a war that we have to win through strength. And the military surge that started after the Obama administration came into office was the result of that strategy. Let's put over 100,000 US troops, 150,000 NATO troops on the ground, albeit for a short time, as I mentioned earlier, and we can use force to solve this problem. I don't personally, well, we see what the results of that were, is that you need an overwhelming amount of force, even more than I think our political supporters at home and our ally supporters can commit to over time. The other side of the debate is, oh, this is really a social problem, and so we need to develop Afghanistan, develop its economy, deal with social relations among people, and that will reduce the drivers of conflict. That alone, too, is not, I don't think, a viable path because of Afghanistan's state of development. It will take years and more billions than we have available. And so really, again, in this policy review, it's figuring out what is the combination of factors. And I think the ambassador said this well already, but what is that combination of factors to unify the civilian and the military efforts so that you get a coherent policy going toward a clear desired end state. And on that point, I think, again, what all Afghanistan and regional watchers tend to say is that there is not a military solution to the conflict. It has to be a peace deal. And so what I would propose is when you do review Afghanistan's mix of civilian and military development, rather than orienting each to their own goal of a certain level of security or a certain amount of pressure against the Taliban versus a certain degree of health or education indicators, what happens when you make the one clear goal optimizing a peace deal with the Taliban? That's not an answer, unfortunately, I have right here. But I think providing a clear direction of policy, of a policy review, and ultimately to a policy that says optimizing a peace deal that protects U.S. interests, that protects Afghanistan's interests, that the allies can get behind and unify their support for, that is the way to resolve the conflict over the medium term. It won't happen in a year or 2 years or probably 3. But if you don't start now, we know the peace process needs to take years to unfold and bear fruit, then you won't get there in the end. And so optimizing our policy, civilian and military efforts toward a peace deal, I think would be an admirable goal for a policy review. Mm-hmm. The final thing that I'll talk about is the regional picture, which of course relates to the peace process. I mean, one of the reasons why the conflict has perpetuated for so long is that a variety of Afghanistan's neighbors, as well as foreign donors, support different factions in this conflict. And so we're obviously supportive of the government, which is, I think, a good place to be. Pakistan has provided safe havens for the Taliban consistently over time, and I think that's quite clear. And as the ambassador mentioned, changing Pakistan's strategic calculus is essential. That said, we don't have a lot of leverage over Pakistan, but we need to figure out ways to engage the neighbors. One is through, I mentioned before, the confidence that Afghanistan will have continued assistance and can be stabilized with foreign support. But otherwise, you need to look at the other regional factors affecting the conflict. I think most significantly, Pakistan's calculation on Afghanistan is affected by India and its fears of India, rightly or wrongly. And so some way to look at the larger picture of India and Pakistan, and as that affects Afghanistan, I think is a key ingredient for success. China was mentioned earlier. That is, I think, the new, it's not a game changer, but China's relationship with Pakistan can be used in regional discussions. And I think China's increasing interest both in Afghanistan, where they have some state business investments, but also in the larger region through their One Belt and One Road initiative. China is seeking to engage more in the region and the world on a foreign policy basis, and there are ways to engage that could help a peace process but not solve it. The final note that I would say is a cautionary one on the regional picture, and that is how U.S. relations evolve with these regional players over time will have a significant effect on our ability to achieve our goals in Afghanistan. And so if U.S. and Iran relations deteriorate, that could have an impact on Afghanistan's stability. Likewise, if our relations with China or with Pakistan deteriorate for other issues that we're pursuing, that will have knock-on effects for the peace process. So really this needs to look, you need to look at our Afghanistan goals and the regional goals as part of our overall foreign policy picture.
Well, Scott, thank you very much. That was fascinating as well. One thing that I noticed, neither you nor Ambassador Cunningham mentioned one country, and it borders, of course, on Afghanistan, is Russia. And President-elect Trump, there's some talk of a possible meeting of the Putin and Trump. There's, of course, one can certainly see the complexities with Russia having fought a long war in Afghanistan and ultimately having pulled out. I wonder what we should say about the prospective role of Russia in Afghanistan going forward. That is the main question. Another thing that did tempt me that was very interesting, you talked about better service delivery. You didn't elaborate exactly what you meant there. I wonder if you could say a word about that as well.
Sure. On the Russia issue, I think Russia is playing an increasing role in Afghanistan. I think its interests are, one, the drug trade and drugs, opium that flows north into Central Asia and then ultimately into Russia is a concern and interest. Probably more importantly is Russia's concern that terrorism within Afghanistan will destabilize or otherwise export to the Central Asian neighbors that Russia considers still in its sphere of influence. And so I think it's taking more of an assertive and defensive posture within Afghanistan to protect those two perceived interests. I think that Russia maybe in Afghanistan can play more of a spoiler role if it chooses to, in terms of supporting northern factions that, northern power brokers that will protect the border but not necessarily support the state. So it can play a disruptive influence. I don't think Russia has, at this point, a lot of leverage where a good relationship and cooperation with them will yield huge benefits for a peace process. I mean, the legacy of its invasion in Afghanistan doesn't make it a positive partner as much. Finally, on service delivery, I mean, what I'm talking about basically is essential development: roads, power, health, education. The key ingredients for social cohesion, for economic empowerment that Afghans badly need and badly want. To the extent that the government can deliver these things, it will gain more support. Again, people really want security more than anything else, and that's a larger struggle. But if the Afghan government can make changes where they provide also jobs and development, then I think their position with the people will be quite a bit stronger. And finally, to make that link clear, the insurgency perpetuates because Afghans in many areas are unsure of who they should support and who will protect them. And so the extent that they can have greater faith in their own government to provide services, I think, will lead to a better security environment as well.
Well, thank you very much. Now, as our final speaker, we have Ambassador Wynn. Good to see a former alum of the Woodrow Wilson School, where I taught for a long time. And we look forward to your remarks.
Great. Well, it's great to be here. I've been trying to select from my remarks various things that haven't been said yet. But I do need to start off underscoring with a point that many of us who have worked on Afghanistan and remain interested do agree upon, that we do favor an enduring commitment by the United States, but not just by the United States, by other international partners, and increasingly by regional partners in this effort. And at its essence, there's a negative essence to the goal, which is to what you want to avoid. You want to avoid a situation where terrorists and radicals can use parts or all of Afghanistan for their ends. You want to avoid a situation where internally in Afghanistan there is a return to struggle between other groups in Afghanistan. And the neighbors, and as far away as the European Union and others, want to avoid new waves of immigrants leaving that country. So from avoiding the negative to the positive, which is what is the way we're going to do that. I think there are 5 pillars of areas that we have to work, and we've talked about those. One is security assistance, security performance, largely by the Afghan forces, with continued support, however, for a good number of years, probably, by the U.S. and others as they strengthen their capabilities. Second is improved governance and a political process. Again, a big part of which is the responsibility of Afghan actors, but with development and other kind of assistance helping in that process in the fight against corruption and other things, supporting Afghan political will to do these things. Economic development has to continue, and that's going to need funding. And it's going to need funding for quite a while. The World Bank did an estimate noting that in the best of circumstances, substantial amounts of international assistance are going to be needed through 2030 for Afghanistan to continue a hopeful development strategy. There's been a lot of progress, but there's a lot more progress, clearly, that's needed, and that needs sustained help. And then the regional factor that my colleagues have both mentioned is going to be vital, both on the economic front, from these regional projects that can help in the near term bring additional income to Afghanistan, transit of energy, transit of goods, and then in the peace process. This, as everybody says, this needs to be an Afghan-led process, but it can be facilitated by many people and undermined by many people. And both of these lead us back to Pakistan, which has a key role to play for good or not so good, as we know from recent years. And as Ambassador Cunningham said, ways need to be found, I'll put it in the most diplomatic way, to incentivize positive behavior by Pakistan. And that is going to require a review by the new administration, how to do that. We have not successfully been able to do it, either the United States or the combination of other regional powers up until this point. It's been a mixed bag. And then finally, of course, that regional effort has I would say has to be better coordinated and has to have more support than it has in the past. And the effort to explain the importance of this, as Ambassador Cunningham said earlier, to our publics has to continue and be be a very solid effort in all places. What's interesting to me is in 2016, despite a whole list of negative developments that we could go through, the international community basically rallied around Afghanistan. NATO and its partners committed to 4 more years of security assistance at the level of several $billion a year. International donors gathered and committed to over $15 billion worth of assistance for the next 4 years. And it was based on an understanding of mutual commitments that this assistance would continue with the idea it will gradually decrease. 2, the Afghan side will make specific commitments to demonstrate increased service delivery, increased efforts against corruption, a whole bunch of different areas where we can go in and look at this in more detail. And they committed to do certain things in the next year. They committed to a regular review process and working this through. And all of that is going to be both very hard but very important. And again, as Jim said earlier too, that needs to be part of the review, because the tools that we've used and the mix of using those tools has had mixed results, some successes and some less successful efforts, and a lot of money put in there. But basically, we are now at a level of support from the international community and from the United States, which is much more sustainable than it was a few years ago, and can provide a solid foundation for this long-term signal of commitment from Afghanistan's partners. That is very important. I fully agree with the points that have been made by my colleagues that we need a clear signal to the regional partners and to the Taliban and others that the international community and big regional players are going to stay engaged in finding a solution to this challenge of Afghanistan and to get Afghanistan to a place where it is much more of a pillar of stability over the long term. In the interim, what the United States has done is moved from the notion that we are nation building to the notion that Afghanistan is a key part of our security strategy, our counterterrorism strategy for the region. And I think that is very important. But with the caveat of knowing you have to still continue this assistance in the economic area and the development area as part of the formula to get you to your counterterrorism stability goals over the long run. It is finding that right mix that needs to be looked at in the months ahead and continued. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll stop there since we're now at our time.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. In view of that, of course, we do look forward to comments, but I had just one question that really intrigues me because it flows across all three of your comments. Ambassador Cunningham had stressed, and Mr. Warden, and you also, the sort of central role of Pakistan in all of this, and that Pakistan policy needs a review. And so I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more. I suppose this is to put it, for lack of a better term, I don't know if carrot and stick is the appropriate wording, but of sort of dissuasion and persuasion, maybe. What really is needed with respect to Pakistan policy, particularly in the context of the strong support and engagement that China has with Pakistan?
Well, as Jim mentioned earlier, there's still a big divide among those people in the U.S. government and out of the U.S. government who watch Afghanistan and Pakistan as to what mix might be successful in getting Pakistan to change its point of view. Anybody that I've talked to who has worked on the military and security side of this point to the safe havens in Pakistan as an essential element that needs to change if there's going to be more impetus for finding a peace process. How you get to that is where you get into a lot of debates. But let me just add, even on the economic side, one of the things that we did with our Afghan partners, with the Pakistanis and with others in the period that I was in Afghanistan was to negotiate a trade and transit agreement. Well, that trade and transit agreement is still stuck, not being fully implemented. That could be, you would think, a mutually advantageous way to build ties, to promote commerce, to promote growth on both sides of the border. But even there's a big challenge. And then, of course, if you look at these regional transit and infrastructure proposals, they're bringing things to Pakistan, in a lot of cases, electricity and gas. So there are, even outside the military security sphere and the peace process sphere, there are very important things that Pakistan could do. But I don't really have that right mix of what are the right incentives to do that. I do think that is one of the things that the new administration needs to sit down and seriously think through. Part of that will be, again, engaging consistently and seriously with the Pakistan government and seeing if through what you say and do, you can get them to be more serious about their commitments to support all of these processes, the peace process, the development process, and all related to them in a more consistently positive way than they have in the past. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anybody Jim or Scott, you want to add anything?
No, I think that's right.
Well, we've opened up a number of tremendously important issues, and we look forward to comments. I know a lot of people are knowledgeable in this area. As we've seen in just a broad range of things, the role of Pakistan, the role of China, various regional players, the political military element. I see a question right here. Please, and also please identify yourself.
My name is Ramin Manawi. I'm counselor at the Afghan Embassy. First, I thank the panelists for taking the time to come and talk about Afghanistan. I think it's extremely important for the agenda for Afghanistan to be discussed at this stage, since, as the ambassador said, that there is unpredictability in the international affairs and also within the U.S. government when it comes to issues on Afghanistan or our region. As the Ambassador Cunningham said, that there used to be lack of clarity on issues related to our region and on Afghanistan. I think that is partly because Afghanistan was not very much involved on important or bigger discussions when it comes to our region or the country itself. I think Afghanistan could be part of those discussions, and in two ways. Afghanistan could provide perspectives that would be very useful for taking an approach that could resolve the most complex issues in our region. And also, as I said, Afghanistan can define those complexities and can put forward an agenda that could be beneficial for all parties. At the end of the day, Afghanistan is a country that has been suffering from instability for decades. And we know that it is the instability in Afghanistan is mostly external in nature, and it is embedded in our region. And a regional solution is extremely important, but Afghanistan should be more involved. Afghanistan's voice should be heard most frequently in order to come up with a solution that is beneficial in our region. I think it's good that we have friends like the ambassadors and also Scott, who are in a position that could better inform the public and also influence decision makings within the U.S. government to help Afghanistan and help our region. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I don't know if anyone would like to comment directly on those remarks. Well, we certainly appreciate your perspectives, and I think everyone agrees that certainly the Afghan role and Afghans' voice is important. Yes, please.
Richard Ponzio from the Stimson Center. Another prominent scholar here at SAIS is, of course, Professor Fred Starr, and his famous work on the modern Silk Road strategy, which became the new Silk Road Initiative under Secretary Clinton in 2011. And, of course, at the heart of that is creating new economic relationships for Afghanistan across the region, but to improve the conditions towards the negotiated peace settlement that many of you refer to as the medium-term solution. Ambassador Wayne, with your emphasis particularly on economic issues and even acknowledging the difficulties on trade and transit with countries like Pakistan, is it time for this next administration to revitalize the economic initiatives, many regional platforms that the United States was central to initiating, the Heart of Asia process that Ambassador Cunningham has been a key leader on, the RECA Forum since 2005, the U.S. strongly backed that, and CARIC, and then of course Scott referred to important countries like China and the One Belt, One Road initiative. How do we leverage that to Afghanistan's advantage?
Well, not surprisingly, I'll say yes. I do think this is an important area of engagement and engaging with international institutions like the Asian Development Bank. I see we have their representative in Washington here. They've played a very important role, and I think can continue to play that role. And I think the role of the outside players and the development banks is basically facilitating, making it easier for the regional partners to agree and start making things happen, not doing it for them. We know that there are some challenges with some of those regional governments and getting them to lift some conditions they've had that have limited who can own various pipelines and how they can go forward. So there is some perhaps room for diplomatic persuasion there also, even though they're hard people to persuade. Clearly, this has gone on for a while. But I think increased attention would be a good thing. And not only by the United States, of course, but by the other partners who are going to benefit. But giving it a little higher level attention in the United States, I think, might help persuade those governments to move ahead also. I think it is true. The other factor is that's important to recognize is China's decision to follow this strategy from China to Europe, a big investment of effort on their part. And I think it does behoove the United States and others to be involved in these kind of mega infrastructure strategies because we do have important interests, both not just economic but strategic, in how the network develops in the region.
Anyone else on that point? Yeah.
I mean, I would agree with that. I would just say, maybe to amplify that, the regional trade and connectivity has been a theory for a long time, and it makes me wonder, as you look to new administrations inevitably do, what can we really push? What can we throw money behind? What can we put in a 100-day agenda or a year-long agenda in the case of Afghanistan? And I don't think that actually making the connections, whether it be the electricity projects that are underway or the gas pipeline project that's been talked about for a long time, I don't think any one of those are going to suddenly transform the calculus of Pakistan and the peace agenda. But having something concrete actually start delivering either megawatts or gas or trucks and trade to Pakistan from Afghanistan, where you can see a material benefit, not just dismiss it if you're a cynical political leader in Pakistan and dismiss it as, this will never happen, but you actually see the benefits. I think that there's hope, and it's worth analyzing and choosing one, and I don't know which one that is, but choosing one to really get behind so that you can have a material benefit flowing that links these important parts of the region and see what happens with that. Too often, I think we put them all in the same, we haven't prioritized, right? And so they're all in various states of undone, and we push gradually, but maybe prioritizing one and seeing what happens is useful. I'll finally say, there was one material connection that was made, albeit not with Pakistan, but the Chabahar port in Iran, where Indian trade can go through Iran via overland to Afghanistan. That was hailed as a significant achievement of the Afghan government. I don't know what the numbers are, but there's one example where the political conversation changed as a result of that deal. And so maybe that's a model for future ones to change people's thinking on both sides of the border.
And I would add, this is one of the arguments that we and others have been trying to get across to Islamabad for some time, that there's a positive perspective for Pakistan in all of this, whether it's the Silk Road or the China Initiative or whatever it is. There's a positive future economic prospect for Pakistan down that road, but that road has not been and is not developing. In fact, what's happening is alternatives are being explored that go around Pakistan for a variety of reasons. One of the things that I would hope in this new review that I called for would be to sit down and find a way on the positive side of the agenda to explain to Pakistan what that region could look like in 10 years with a stable Afghanistan and with a Pakistan wired into this interconnection of trade and energy and infrastructure development that we've been talking about now for at least a decade. China is willing to put some serious money on the table. That's a big change. We ought to be figuring out how to leverage that also in this alternative vision. I agree with Councillor Minawi. An Afghanistan that is increasingly confident and stable and is a contributor to development and stability in the region, it opens up a whole different prospect for Pakistan and other countries in the region that doesn't really exist right now and hasn't existed. We can help, we Americans can help find a way to develop this different alternative vision in a way that we might be able to go to people in Pakistan and elsewhere in the region and say, look, this is the kind of thing that we can help produce a decade from now.
If I might just interject, I heard the word Chabahar mentioned, and then a couple of people reacted to that. And I wondered, does the fact that the Chabahar port is going forward, that potentially could bypass Pakistan, does that change the dynamic in some ways that might put pressures on Pakistan that could be positive? Or does it? How does that figure the possible evolution of a Chabahar port?
Well, if you look at Pakistan's set of needs, they need energy, and that doesn't change with that port. If you can get them electricity or gas or oil from a different source, I think that would be a big plus to them. So I think that continues as a benefit. I don't know if Craig, if you want to say anything from the perspective of the
We'd love to hear from Craig.
Asian Development
You have
Bank.
thoughts?
Not on Chabahar, but on the regional
In general,
infrastructure
yeah.
projects.
Microphone.
Thanks. I fully agree that if groups like ADB could do anything useful in the sub-region that would help Afghanistan and might allow things to improve, that getting adequate, reliable electricity into Pakistan is key. I've read about, just for example, employment opportunities in textile mills in Pakistan if only there were adequate electricity. And the numbers, and I forget exactly what they are, but they're in the hundreds of thousands. It's really astounding. And by implication, the effect that could have on the relationship between Pakistan and some of its neighbors, if the economy in Pakistan were to grow and employment opportunities were to be created and people had alternative livelihoods than some of the things they do today, that's the kind of dynamic, I think, or the change in dynamic that's needed to see things progress the way we all hope. So I think ADB's view is that we're doing everything we can to get electricity into Pakistan via Afghanistan. I think Puli Kumri will become a center for trade in electricity for the sub-region. It's easier said than done. It's going to be expensive. But of all the things going on, I would think that electricity, maybe development of railways, improved telecommunications, opening the borders to free movement of people, goods, and vehicles, or freer, let's say. All of these things are doable. It's just a question of resolve, I think, to see them happen more quickly than we're seeing today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So clearly there's a multilateral dimension in this, and just thinking about the role of Japan and Korea, or particularly Japan, one might suppose also that working through multilateral institutions to help to facilitate regional solutions would be a major contribution that those countries could make also. More questions, please.
I'm the former director at UMIC. I'm interested to talk on the peace agenda. As everybody knows, peace and negotiation efforts didn't work. And we believe that the Taliban are not independent. They are controlled by Pakistan, and Pakistanis are utilizing them as a tool for their strategic depth. So unless Pakistan is not ready to come to negotiation table and bring them, actually, we cannot end or go anywhere with the peace process. And I definitely agree with the change of calculus of Pakistan. What would be the incentive to change the Pakistani calculus in terms of their strategic depth in Afghanistan?
Well, as I mentioned, I didn't go into detail, and Tony picked it up too. in a paper recently that a bunch of us, some senior people who'd been involved in Afghanistan over the last years, did in September, in which you could find on the Atlantic Council, Brookings, and RAND websites. We looked at what we thought collectively a new administration should take up. This was before the election, obviously. Should take up and should look at in Afghanistan. All of us who participated in that, the only thing we couldn't agree on in that whole paper was what to do about Pakistan. And we all agreed that the policies that this administration and previous administration had pursued did not achieve the desired effect from our point of view. And that continuation of that kind of approach was going to keep producing the lack of performance that we wanted to see, along the lines that we wanted to see. But we couldn't come together on agreement of, even if there was a new approach to Pakistan that would work. There was some thought that we had tried everything and there wasn't a new way forward. I'm not of that view, by the way. But we could not produce an agreement on what kind of new agenda or new package of relations we might produce that would really actually finally induce Pakistan to do what it's been telling us it wants, intends, plans, desires, maybe do for the last 5 or 6 years. That's going to take some serious thought, because the reason that is the case is that we have a complicated relationship with Pakistan. We, the United States, have a complicated relationship, and it's an important relationship with an important country. So we need to, there are many conflicting aspects of that relationship. So pushing or pulling on one area of the relationship produces results in positive or negative results in other areas of the relationship. I believe that we owe it not only to ourselves, but to our partners and to the Afghans and to the Pakistanis to find a way to get them over the hump to actually start acting on what they have been telling us for years they agree on, which there is no distinction between good or bad terrorists. All of them need to be dealt with. And yes, the real threat to Pakistan is from Islamic violent extremism, and it's not from India, and it's not from other countries. And yes, a stable Afghanistan is a good thing for the region and for Pakistan. I don't know how to do that, obviously. I have my own ideas, and other people do. But if we hope in any foreseeable future to get out of this conflict and start building a better future for the region that I think all of us can foresee, we need to find a way to get over that conceptual hurdle and get Pakistan to act against the Taliban leadership that continues to enjoy its safe haven and to be active in Quetta and other places, and to act and curtail the abilities of the Haqqanis to act using Pakistan as a base. That's a pretty fundamental proposition. If we cannot find a way to do that, getting to any kind of stability in Afghanistan, let alone a peace agreement, is going to be immeasurably more difficult.
Thank you. Scott?
Just 3 thoughts quickly on the reconciliation process. I mean, one, in terms of changing the approach to Pakistan, I totally agree. I mean, it's a difficult problem and nothing's worked. I would say the new element, which I mentioned before, is how to link Pakistan's concerns with India to the overall peace process. And that is a very complicated element. But I would say also, to the earlier question on Chabahar, I mean, pressuring Pakistan with threats that they perceive on part of India, I think hasn't produced that much positive reaction. Showing opportunities of cooperation and maybe helping with the Indo-Pak relationship, that might be a better way to go. The other thing with Pakistan and the Taliban is try to make Pakistan less relevant to the peace process. I think Afghanistan in particular has tried the approach, and Ghani invested a lot of political capital in this when he first took office to try to get Pakistan to help them bring the Taliban to the table, and it didn't work. How can relations or negotiations directly with the Taliban be facilitated so that Pakistan doesn't have a blocking role? That's another opportunity to explore. And then the final thing, just within Afghanistan on Taliban and peace negotiation, is how to make the Taliban less relevant and less of a factor. And I think, in this regard, the Asia Foundation annual survey just came out, showed, I think, record low lack of support among Afghans for the Taliban. They're not a popular political movement. That's a big advantage. If the government can improve its relationship and its benefits, then the Taliban will have much a weaker card to play in negotiations.
Ambassador Wynn, add anything? Okay, we have a question right in the back. I believe.
Yeah, I'm Rahela Kabir from Afghanistan. Thank you so much for the panel, all speakers. I agree with the civilian and also military option, and also the for the neighborhood countries in Afghanistan. But beside all of this, my preference is the social development and also social inclusion. Based on my experience, as Afghanistan have so many tribal and ethnic divisions, and this ethnic and also language divisions, which is one of the cause for the social conflict and ethnic and tribal conflict in Afghanistan. And I think this is one of also the main cause for instability in Afghanistan. So how the Afghanistan government would be able to overcome with this tribal and social conflicts. And I know this is the long-term strategy, which is like education and civilization is very important. And the another is that there is also a gap between the Afghanistan government. It is the gap of trust between the government and the people. And at the same time, it is a gap. It is a gap of trust between the people and also the United States government, the people of Afghanistan, and also. So how you would be how you will support Afghanistan government to make or bridging the relationship between the people and also the Afghanistan government. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, this is a major challenge. It's one that we have been, as partners, working with the Afghan government for the last 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, especially as the gaps became clearer with the resurgence of the Taliban in the mid-2000s. And it's not easy, for sure. At its essence, I suppose it goes back to what we called service delivery, showing that the government can provide good things and not just bad things vis-a-vis corruption of local officials and others. And so certainly education and health have been the areas where there have been the most significant improvements. But if you, in fact, look at this, which you probably have, this last survey of the Afghan people, you find that confidence in officials at all levels has dropped significantly. And also the reliability of those services, even some of those basic electric services and other things, has dropped over the past year. The government knows this, and that is the reason for some of their commitments to donors to have a series of benchmarks to show that they are getting better at providing those services. Clearly there's a big space for continued investment in infrastructure. There's a big space for continued investment in the agricultural sector for the near term, both to provide more food, but also to provide more jobs. As you know, Afghanistan faces a youth bulge. Many young people going through school, coming on to the potential job market, are going to need jobs. You want to educate as many of those as you can to as high a level as you can, but you also need to provide jobs for them in the near term. So I think the kind of programs and opportunities that will create jobs is one very essential part of this. Having an electoral process that actually functions is going to be part of this too, because the combination, of course, of unhappiness among ethnic groups or different parts of the country is a combination of a lack of opportunity plus a feeling that they aren't adequately represented or aren't participating, or when they have participated, it has not produced good results. So you have to have that participation channel working better at the same time. You know, there's no even 2 or 3 magic keys, I think, to all of this. It's working in a series of areas, and with the goal, with the clear method of having measurable achievements along the way that are actually bringing these benefits to people. And I think you will minimize ethnic problems and others if you are actually delivering goods and services that a government is supposed to deliver. And of course, at the very base, now this goes back, at the base is providing security, because you can't develop the economy or maintain the infrastructure if you don't have security in that area. So you go full circle, but it just shows you have to keep working in each of these areas with the understanding that your point is an essential goal for the government of Afghanistan.
I'm sorry, I would just underscore that last point about security. I mean, in my most recent visit and several visits over the last couple of years, I think that ethnic tensions and ethnic identity in politics is increasing. And I think one of the reasons is because the security situation across the board is decreasing, and people revert to, maybe core groups and core beliefs under those circumstances. And so the more that security can be improved and the more that politics can be more inclusive, including through elections, I think that is really a baseline for ending the problems that you identified.
If I could just add, I agree completely about the integral role of security here, but I also want to note something that has become kind of a pet theme of mine, which is your question suggested that the international community or the United States could somehow deal with these internal Afghan problems, and I think we need to take a more realistic view about what role the United States can play in resolving these very important Afghan issues, and acknowledge that this is something that Afghans themselves need to figure out. Politics is messy and can be a dirty business, as we've seen in this country over the last couple months. And it's no less true of Afghanistan and the political situation as it now exists. I don't think it's at all unexpected that the Afghan people are disappointed in their government, and I know that many people who are in the government are disappointed that they haven't been able to find a way to make it operate more effectively and more efficiently. But the good news is, in my view, since I'm an optimist, is that they're continuing to try to find a way, and they are making forward progress, and they are finding ways to deal with issues as they go ahead. They do understand that there is not any better way of providing a political process that works than under the government of national unity, despite all of its problems and all of its difficulties. And it is really, in my view, fundamentally up to the Afghan people to demand that its government perform and deliver. That is happening. I hope it will continue to happen. I'm encouraged by the reality that in the elections, in the presidential elections, millions of Afghan men, women, Many children went with them. Men and women went to the polls twice to vote, and in a situation in which many of them thought that they were in peril doing so. That's, I think, a very positive sign of public engagement and commitment to a political process that should be encouraged, and I hope that all of Afghans in Afghanistan and outside and their leaders will find a way to build on that spirit. And that is, to my mind, the key to the future of the country.
Well, we've heard 3 eloquent summaries. I don't think there's a great deal that I could add. Certainly, I think we've learned many things, starting with the importance of clarity that Ambassador Cunningham mentioned at the very beginning and was echoed by our other participants, the importance of the regional context, particularly in terms of economic development, the role of Pakistan, changing the incentives of the key parties, and then the fact that this is not only sort of a version of the great game again with the national governments, but the role of multilateral institutions such as the Asian Development Bank, also from a longer-term perspective, is important. So I think we've all learned a lot. I know I have certainly, and I think we should give our 3 participants a hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
And thank you very much for coming. This is the end of our program. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Scott, very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Figure out how we can work together on this.
Thank you, James. Yeah, exactly.